Today on No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Cramer.
That even though you're walking with God and you're a good Christian and all of this stuff, if I could phrase it that way, please realize that trials have a benefit for your life. And we get a chance to see the compassionate hand of God of what he's up to.
Through innocent blood, he showed his love, taking the cross for us. No greater love than innocent blood.
Have you ever noticed how quickly we go from praising God for victory to complaining when the next hardship hits? Welcome back to No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Cramer. In this closing section of Exodus 15, Pastor Jeff reminds us that while God uses trials to refine us, he also reveals his compassion. For Israel, it was 12 wells and 70 palms in the desert. For us, it's the daily care of a God who heals, provides, and matures his people. Trials don't last forever, but God's compassion does. Let's dive in now to the balance of the message titled, Steps Toward Maturity.
Because the trials are still going to continue to roll through this fellowship. Over the past, 3 weeks, I think we've been impacted in some capacity, both in-house and in around this fellowship, with 5 different deaths. And so it's a real factor. It's a real pain. It's a real, the struggles are very real, but we don't have to bear them alone. And so now let's take note of this, okay? Church, as we face trials, guess what? They also have this refining work upon us because they expose the junk that God is taking out of our lives. And I know that I go, that personally I can walk down the lanes of life myself, and it's like, I just get so frustrated with myself sometimes. It's like, you dummy, you know better than this stuff. And I often forget that God brings that stuff. He heats up the circumstances within my life, and he brings all that stuff to the top, right? It's the junk that comes out of me. It's the thought, it's the words, it's my actions or my attitudes and all that stuff. Listen, God is bringing the junk up to the top because he's exposing what he's taking out of our life. So as believers, we don't fall back and go, all of this stuff is within us. It's in our life. God knows that when he saved us. And the reason for the trial is to change us as people, as we just even read in Romans. We saw that God uses the trial to transform us. So the trial is necessary. So if God has you in a long trial and you're going through this, hey, take heart, take courage. He sees, he knows. He knows, but don't give up. Now, there's a lot more to add to that because surely we can be in a time where there's corrective storms that we're in the middle of. And in a corrective storm, what do you want to do in that? You want to quickly get the lesson that he's laying down, okay? So you don't remain in the hot seat, okay? We can kind of shorten those things, okay? There's instructive storms that come. I think, in fact, in Exodus 14, I think we talked about this. That there's instruction that God gives, and those are like the unexpected things that just, bam, he just takes us through it, right? And we saw and we remember that the disciples were on the Sea of Galilee, and they were following Jesus' direction. Hey, get in the boat, go across the lake, okay? And what happened? They ran into one of the biggest storms that they ever experienced as fishermen, and yet it was led by Jesus. Jesus said, do this and go that way. It was an instructive storm. It was to reveal their faith and to reveal the areas where they were lacking and they didn't know about Jesus. And so, again, much different than a corrective storm. And so, in the Exodus narrative, God is helping his people over and over and over and over again. How long did they wander in the desert, folks? 40 years, round and round and round. And guess what? They still would not trust God, right? You remember that? You remember the story, the ending of all of this stuff that we're going to read? They didn't trust God. They were stubborn in their heart. Don't be that type of a person. Don't be that type of a Christian. Let God have his perfect work because he does desire to change you through the struggle. One more verse here just to anchor this down before I move on. 1 Peter chapter 4. Take a peek at the screen right here. A few verses here. Peter writes this. He says, dear friends, he says, don't be surprised at the fiery trials that you are going through. Is there something strange were happening to you? Instead, be very glad. How am I going to be glad over a trial? Well, for these trials, they make you partners with Christ in his suffering, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it's revealed to all the world. If you're insulted because you bear the name of Christ, you will be blessed, for the glorious Spirit of God rests upon you. If you suffer, however, it must not be for being a murderer, stealing, making trouble, or prying into other people's affairs. But it is no shame to suffer for being a Christian. Praise God for the privilege of being called by his name. And so there's a distinction there. You don't want to suffer as a fool, murder, a hateful person, or stealing, theft. You don't want to suffer down this particular road. Again, that would be a corrective storm. And we have the ability to stay out of a correcting storm. But if we get into a corrective storm, may we quickly run to God and repent, change direction, quickly agree with him, change, and get out of there. There's no reason to stay there. But if we have to go through it for a while, again, just understand and recognize that God desires to change us through these storms that he allows us and that he directs us into. Our natural tendency, I think, is this. I think we get, especially if something goes on for a time and a season, and you look at it, it's like, God, this has been a year and 2 and 3 and more and all that stuff. It's like, God, what are you doing? And many times we can get to that place of just getting frustrated with God. And so, we start yelling at God, why are you doing this? Why are you not changing this in my life? And, I can remember Jody and I and our kids were still with us. So it's been a number of years ago. They were about 10 years into our Christian walk, and then all of a sudden, man, we started running into just ridiculously crazy storms around our life, and I had no idea what God was up to. I didn't understand it at that time. And I look back some 32 years now, and I look back to my collective walk, 32 years with the Lord, but I look back to that first 10 years, and I just saw this season where it just radically increased within our life. And it's like we went, 5 years and nothing. It didn't feel like nothing really continued to keep moving forward and all this stuff. And I go, like, God, what are you up to? Why is this happening? But now I look back so many years later and I realize that even as I stand before you here on a regular weekly basis, that I share so many of those stories that came out of those desert seasons in my life. Now I can rejoice because of what God has done. But in the present moment, it was not fun. It was horrible. I can't tell you how many different times along the route, because God was humbling us because of our pride, because of all of these things. And we as Christians, we were going after the money and we were trying to say the right thing and do the right thing. Oh, God, it's going to be all yours. And in reality, it was a hook. We've learned this. It's a hook of Satan. It got us off course from where we were supposed to be. And so God made sure. It didn't happen right away, but it happened. And it was absolutely decided. And when God put us into this place, guess what we had to do? We had to walk out what I'm sharing with you even here tonight. And that is that we'd have to share with our other Christian friends within the church. And I can't tell you how many times that we would get a doorbell ditch. Is that a phrase even anymore? I don't know. You guys are all mostly old, so I guess we're okay. You understand what I'm saying? Not you guys. You guys are, of course, young over here. But you guys, you've been around a while, okay? But you guys know what I'm saying with that? Like, they knock on your door and they bolt or whatever. Man, people would doorbell ditch us and leave groceries on the door because they knew how bad it was. No, don't say, These are instructive storms that God brought us into so that we would learn of his ways. And it's just so beautiful the way that God humbles us. And I share stuff straight up with you guys. And sometimes it gets a little uncomfortable. It's like, oh my gosh, he's talking directly to me. I'm not. Okay. I'm just sharing the truth of the reality of God's word and what he's done within my life by way of testimony, if you will. I don't know your situation. And I'm looking at you like, oh, you stinking. I'm going to look at you because you're taller. Oh, you terrible sinner, Ryan. What the heck? This whole message is for Ryan, by the way. No, I'm not doing that. Okay. And so don't get all uptight in your chair and freak out and all this stuff. Listen, the reality of it is that the struggles are there, but God has the struggles in place for a particular reason. He is accomplishing something within us. In Israel, they complained for 40 years. Now we move to the second and third idea here. We'll go relatively fast on this, but scroll your eyes back, Exodus 15. Now let's go to verse 23. Let's just start right there. It says, now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah. So it's all, they're out in the wilderness of Shur. They can't find water. They get to a place, Mara, okay. Oh, we got water here. Okay. But they couldn't drink the water there. Why? Because they were bitter. And therefore the name of it was called Mara. And what did the people do? Verse 24, and the people complained against Moses saying, what shall we drink? Now, can you imagine being Moses? Leading people out of Israel, taking them into the desert. There was a great victory, all kinds of joy. People were pumped. And now he's 3 days into the desert here. People are falling out because, they have nothing to drink. And then he gets them to another spot here and the water is completely horrible. And man, the water is bitter and the people are complaining. Man, I don't want to be Moses. That's all I'm saying. I'm so thankful that in this season of this fellowship, this doesn't mark this fellowship. This doesn't mark you guys. You guys are fabulous. I tell you, again, we've been a church for 13 years. We've been in this building for 10 years. And you guys, this season of what God is doing this last year and right now, it's just, you guys are fabulous. I hope the church continues to change, but I hope that it does not lose the love in which you guys share. I feel your love. And as I watch you guys, I think you love each other. And that's very special. Somebody down here told me, hey, our church, they linger. People linger around here. That's a blessing. That is a wonderful blessing. But these folks, not so much. And so the second idea that we're going to pull away with is trial, okay? But we come here into number 2, and that is learning. Now, look at verse number 25, because here's the beauty that happens. And so Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And when he cast it into the waters were made sweet. And there he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them. Couple things right here in the middle of this, okay? Number one, what a beautiful foreshadowing of the cross. Why? Because when we take the problems to Jesus, he takes the bitterness out of our circumstances. Beautiful. And again, this is just nothing more than a foreshadowing. Listen, Moses is crying to God, God, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Right? Who was upon the tree for us? It was Jesus was upon the tree for us. And that's why we call this a foreshadowing in this area. God showed him, he says, take the tree, throw it into the middle of that bitter circumstance and watch what I'm going to do, because the water was bitter. And he did something out of that. And then he moves forward and it's still in verse number 25. He took what was bitter and he made it sweet. Gang, you should understand this. You should retain this. Is that when we get into these areas of our life to where there's bitterness that comes in, when I look to the cross of Christ, when I look to the promise that Jesus has given unto me, when I look to his faithfulness, he will take the bitter sting out of any circumstance that you go through, and he'll make it sweet. Doesn't mean that he removes the pain. It doesn't mean that he removes the trial. It doesn't mean anything like that. But the bitterness of our soul is the toxic corruption that creeps in, that Satan wants to cause us to be hindered in our spiritual progress. God puts us in trial for a very specific reason. And when he puts a sweetness in the middle of that, he's giving me the ability supernaturally to endure whatever the struggle is. It doesn't matter what the struggle is in your life. He will give you the ability to endure that struggle until he takes you home. And we can bank on the faithfulness of God, and we can say and we can preach and we can search the scriptures with authority, and we come back to the wonderful hand of our God. Practically speaking, if I was to reduce it to a couple words, we should understand this, that struggle precedes victory. That's it. Struggle precedes victory. And what do we learn in that? Again, he takes the bitterness out of it and he puts a sweetness into the middle of that. And we will see victory because of our God, because of what he's done, what he's accomplishing. We know that trials don't last forever. Here's a phrase that somebody taught me years ago. When you get into a trial and you need to encourage yourself, just remember this phrase: this too shall pass. 100%. This too shall pass. And God wants his people to learn the lesson of faith so that we can trust him in the moments of struggle. And so what did he do? Look at verse 25 again, right there. It's the last few words there, 3 words. He tested them. Now look to your neighbor for a second and say, this is going to get stinky. You know what this literally means? To prove or to try by smell. It's a smell test. Literally. He tested them. A smell test. I think we can remember a couple things, maybe the Psalms or something like that, where the scripture says, hey, taste and see that the Lord is good. But when it comes to this area of a smell test, I got a note in my Bible here, and I should have looked at it before I came in this service here. My little note here in the Bible, this is my handwritten note. So we're looking at to prove or to try by smell. And I put a little note for myself. So I wonder, we're going to discover it together. Revelation 5:8 says this. It says, now when they had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders, they fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Oh man, the smell test. I get it now. That's a revelation. So it's just to remind me, a smell test. Think about that. We want that sweet fragrance of our prayers turning to God, and we don't want to be relying upon ourselves, our own ingenuity, I'm just gonna press on in my pride because I'm tough. I'm gonna do all this stuff. No. We want a dependence upon God. And Moses was laying that out. He was walking that out. He looked to the Lord. He didn't know what to do. God showed him. He showed him the tree, the cross, as you and I would consider it. And it was there in the middle of the love of God that bitter water turned into sweet water. And now we move forward and we understand this, that character is developed as we surrender to God-given circumstances. Those circumstances that fall outside of our control. Why? Because this is the road of faith. It's a walk towards Christian maturity. I have to exercise myself in the sense of, God, you said this, I believe you, even though everything that I see and I feel, it's just colliding with my natural instinct, but your word says this. And God uses life-changing trials to prepare us with what lies ahead in our each individual life, our each individual ministry. And this brings us to the final idea of the night, idea number 3. Okay, so remember what we're looking at. We're looking at the TLC, the trials, the learning, and the compassion. They had to learn something. They had to look to the Lord, and they had to learn, and they learned it as a group there. And now we get to the final side of this. Idea number 3 is compassion. Now, before we consider that, let's talk about Job for just a second. Remember how much Job suffered through. He suffered through a lot. But there was lessons in it for Job as well. Take a peek at the screen here. Job 42:5 says this. This is Job. He's talking to the Lord. He says, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear. Many of you, not all, but many of you in this room, you haven't gone through some crazy life-altering trial. And you've heard a lot about God, and you've heard a lot, and you can receive these truths, but they haven't been a reality within your life. Job went through a trial that was devastating. Some scholars say that it lasted about 6 months of time. But the devastation in which he went through, the loss of his business, the loss of his children, the loss of his health, all of these things. I mean, it was so bad that his first wife, if I could say it like that, she says, curse God and die. It was horrible for him. But at the very end, when God restored him, Job says, I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. In other words, he had a complete, full understanding of what God was up to and the gracious, compassionate hand of God. God did not afflict Job because he was being a troublemaker and a jerk. God was bragging on him in chapter 1. Hey, have you considered my servant Job? There's not one like him on the earth. He's an upright man. He's a guy that fears God and all of this stuff. Here's the point, don't miss it. That even though you're walking with God and you're a good Christian and all of this stuff, if I could phrase it that way, please realize that trials have a benefit for your life. And we get a chance to see the compassionate hand of God of what he's up to. And in verse number 27, as we close Exodus now, here's what happens. Actually, let me read you verse 26 too. He says in verse 26, he says that if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all of his statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you, which I brought on the Egyptians. Remember what they just saw. They just came out of the 10 plagues. They saw God doing, putting these plagues on them for rebellion. What does Jesus tell us in the New Testament? In John chapter 15, that if we abide in his word and his word within us, right, that we're going to be fruitful and that we can call to him and we can ask him, okay? He's not talking about a perfect person. He's talking about a person that is dependent upon Christ. Verse 27 goes on, or 26 goes on. He says, for I am the Lord who heals you, Jehovah Rapha. I love that. He says, then they came to Elim. And this is about 7 miles, so they've moved on again, 7 miles south of Marah. And what was there? Well, there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, and so they camped there by the waters. Check this out, Christian. Don't miss this, okay? The compassionate hand of God. He brings them into this place. He was teaching them along the way. There was a trial. There was this instruction or this learning, if you will. But his compassionate hand was there. And the 12 wells of water, the 70 palm trees, it reflected that God did care for his people, and that trial, that moment, what he was doing in those, those handful of days right there, it came to an end. But that celebration that they had coming through the Red Sea, yeah, God, all of this stuff, he revealed how shallow of a praise that it was, because just a few days the other side of that, they're having a cow. This God, what the heck, Moses, you brought us over here, you knucklehead, and all of this stuff. They're flipping out again and just complaining and complaining and complaining. So God brought a trial to bring that stuff to the surface, to show them, to reveal to them that they needed to go deeper. And yet, while he gave the lessons in there, he gave the instruction, he also followed it up with this compassion. And he uses the struggles to mold us. And here's the biblical perspective, if you could receive it. Take a peek at the screen. Last one there on the screen. James 1 and 2 says this very simply. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. I wish I could remember that in the middle of a trial. Why is it the simple truths of, they elude me in those times? I don't know. I don't know. But I do understand this. But there's an interesting thing here as he brings them to these wells and the palm trees. There was 12 tribes and there's 12 wells. There's sufficiency for all and the 70 palm trees. And here's what's interesting. Here's what's interesting about the palm trees. That the palm trees, they're the only tree in the entire world that bears more fruit as they age. And if you can receive this, Christian, as you mature in Jesus, you will naturally bear more and more fruit. It's a natural process, but it is something that God has laid out. That just like God has given us the responsibilities up to a man to plan his ways, it's the Lord that gives direction. God's the one that gives the opportunity. He opens and closes doors. He does all of this stuff. But there's a responsibility, even for us as Christians, to make sure that we're walking out a maturing Christian life by putting in place the things that we're learning. And just like the palm tree, that the older we get in the faith, that we're naturally going to bear more and more fruit as we go. And that's the deal, right? The phrase in the church is, I want to finish better than I start. Listen, I sincerely herald that to you. I want to finish. Jody and I, we often talk about this. Hey man, we just want to finish better than we start. We want to finish better than we start, okay? And I hope that God puts that same desire within your heart, that you want to finish your Christian walk better than where you started. In other words, you're not staying right there at the edge. Yeah, I became a Christian in such and such a year. And you look back at the end of your life and you go, oh man, why was I standing on the guardrail my entire life? I don't know. But I don't want to be that man.
That's all for today. Join us for our next broadcast of No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Cramer, weekdays at 10:30 a.m. No Greater Love is an outreach ministry of Westminster Calvary and is supported by listeners like you. If you would like to partner with us, please text GIVE to 720-354-6485. Your donation of any amount helps keep No Greater Love on the air, ministering to thousands across the Front Range. We would like to personally invite you to join us for our weekly worship services, Sundays at 8 or 10 a.m. and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. We are located in Westminster, Colorado, on the northeast corner of Church Ranch and Wadsworth Parkway, near the Vasa Fitness.
If you're not local, tune into the weekly live stream on our web campus app, Roku, or on Apple TV. Have you downloaded the free Westminster Calvary app yet? You can stay up to date on upcoming events, join a small group, request prayer, and watch live worship services. Just search Westminster Calvary on your favorite app store today. Lastly, we're a church that's ready to serve you. If we can do so, give us a call at 303-223-4640. And remember, there's no greater love than when Jesus gave up his life for you and me. Thanks, and God bless.